Where's my paper, dude? You gave me some paper and then you took it away.
You take fucking notes?
Thank you. Yeah, man. Sometimes I get a good idea in the middle of somebody speaking. How am I supposed to remember that? I can't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning.
All right, so the notes I got for this are Weinstein, Milo's take on it, which those are Kevin Spacey and a Corey Feldman update after the last podcast we had. So we can talk about that again more if you wanted to. The New York City terrorist attack just happened. Obviously relevant. I don't know what hot takes we have on it. But,
hot takes.
Manafort, Podesta, which I don't have a ton to say other than the fact that these are dudes on opposite. Shit. This is like the swamp personified.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like these are the dudes on opposite sides during a campaign. Yeah. And everyone's focusing on Manafort, but dude.
Something's happening with Podesta right now?
He just stepped down from the Podesta lobbying group because of this. Him and Manafort were caught together. Manafort's getting all the attention, but Podesta's part of it.
By the way, did any of these guys watch the Netflix special of Get Me Roger Stone? Because in Get Me Roger Stone, they talk about how back in the 90s and early 2000s, Roger Stone and Paul Manafort lobbied on behalf of the Ukrainian government and took all this money. How they made millions of dollars doing this.
Isn't that
which is essentially what they're charging him with?
Yeah,
money laundering and doing stuff for the Ukraine. Which to me is like, hey, that's not a surprise. Everybody knew that he was doing it.
So did you see? So let's talk about this now. Did you see?
Which, by the way, let me ask you this question: If Mueller's supposed to be investigating Russian ties, how the heck does prosecution for hiding money from the IRS and laundering money with the Ukrainian government get wrapped into this? I mean, I get it. You're digging for stuff. Stuff comes up, but that's completely separate.
Yeah, Ukraine, Russia, same shit. Dude.
Yeah, except they hate each other. That's the funny part is the mainstream media is trying to pin this oh look, this is Russian collusion, except no, he was working with the Ukrainians who hate Russia.
Well, it's kind of more complicated than that, right? I mean, isn't the government of Ukraine kind of Russia friendly at this point?
I thought that they had significant disagreements in regards to pipelines and all that kind of stuff in Crimea and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that they are completely in harmony, but I think the government that recently got in there is way more Russia friendly than the previous one. Wasn't there?
How did that happen?
Well, perhaps, but
that's the whole thing.
These allegations are from 2011 to 2014, which would, if that's a true statement. Either way, it's just it's a complete cluster to be certain.
So. Tucker Carlson just did, he is getting some attention for this because he reported on it, right? And, he's been doing a pretty good job on these sorts of things. And the attorney, a big shot attorney group in DC that works for the Podestas, sent him a cease and desist letter talking about this topic, and said, don't mention it ever again. We're going to come after you, all this shit. They're lies, And so Tucker read the letter on the air and then said, I guess you haven't seen the indictment because we quoted the indictment that you're saying is wrong. And he's like, if it's wrong, fine, but you have a bigger issue than us, you know?
Go after the United States government, not me.
But then he finished it, with a powerful line, which was, he's like, look, regardless of what comes from this or what your opinion is, you had Manafort, who was a high-ranking official in the Trump campaign, right? Mm-hmm. What was his title?
He was the campaign manager, wasn't he?
I don't think it was manager. It was something along those lines, some high level for some period of time. And Podesta, who everybody knows who that is, coordinating.
Yeah.
Over this issue, at critical points in the campaign. And he's like, this is the swamp. That happened. He's like, regardless, that did happen.
Yeah.
He's like, this is the swamp that people are talking about.
That's right.
Well, I mean, let's be clear first, because I'm not too familiar with this, but from what I do know, all of this stuff is way before Trump was even, obviously before he was a president. It was 2014? A lot of these.
The charges against Manafort, I believe, were laundering money, failing to disclose information to the IRS and the Treasury Department.
Failing to disclose that he himself was a foreign agent.
That's right. And it was from 2011 to 2014. And I believe they also charged some guy, Papadopoulos or something like
George
that, who said that he lied to the FBI about when he met with a Russian professor when he was working for the Trump campaign or something like that. But I haven't seen anything beyond the fact that he lied about that. So I don't.
Well, we have to imagine there's more stuff coming. I mean, this is just the first round of indictments, so to speak. But I mean, so far, I don't see anything incriminating Trump.
No,
at all.
I mean,
other than the general narrative about Trump and his
except
staff
for the fact that he
and
laid
Russia
the guy
and-
off in the beginning of his campaign. He got rid of him and replaced him.
But did
he
he
got
say
rid of him
why?
and replaced him, and also all of the allegations are 2014 and before. None of it is like any active thing that was happening even during Trump's campaign, let alone his presidency.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see what comes of it, but I still think it's pretty substantial that regardless, you had Podesta and this guy coordinating, over like Russian matters and lobbying together, and then very clearly like leading figures on opposite sides of the campaign. How Trump like plays into that and, factors in, I don't know. Like, because he got rid of him, but he gets rid of everybody. Did it have anything to do with something like this, or was it something totally unrelated?
Yeah.
I imagine too that any of these guys, like in the swamp, like at any moment they could get busted for any number of improprieties.
So that's why to me, like this whole investigation, anything that comes out, not that like corruption and collusion and all this bad stuff, that it shouldn't come out and there shouldn't be investigations. But like at this point, maybe it's just that I'm cynical, or maybe it's that I'm realistic about it. But it's just like I like to your point. I just feel like if you investigated anybody in Congress or any politician pretty much anywhere and you went deep enough, you're going to find something completely illegal. And not just completely illegal, but like ridiculously illegal, racketeering, a whole string of people with nebulous ties to all these different groups, foreign nationals and stuff like that. So to me, it's like, oh, well, this guy did that. It's like, great. Well, if you spent 6 months digging into these 5 other people, you'd probably find the same thing. And if you spent 6 months digging into these people, you'd probably find stuff that's even worse. So to me, it's like, all right, let the information come out. But let's not sit here and finger wag. That's what drives me the most nuts, is politicians finger wagging. I could get the average voter getting upset by this and finger wagging, but for another politician to finger wag at these guys because, oh, look what they did, it's complete bullshit. Because if they were investigated the same way, under the same sort of scrutiny, they would get indicted for all sorts of ridiculous stuff. Especially
when you hire a guy for a specific purpose to find some kind of wrongdoing. He's going to dig up whatever the fuck this guy
that's
can.
Exactly right.
There's no way the guy's going to come back and say, "Oh, dude, I didn't find anything.
Squeaky clean.
I'm sorry." Like everybody's cool. Like there's no way. He's got to find something.
And this is assuming that the investigator and the people working for him don't have their own political,
that's right.
And then also that the public and the press that are interpreting these things don't have, aren't going to like pull out the information that fits their narrative. Right. And also on the public side, that even if the public is trying to understand this, they don't understand what is normal politics really.
Right.
And so you can throw out something that is totally normal.
Yeah.
Like this idea of opposition research from like a foreign agent. That sounds bad to a normal person, I think. But then you read these people from the inside who are not the ones like on CNN talking about it. And like, you have no idea how like not a story this is. This is like the most typical normal behavior ever, but people aren't aware of that. And so they can throw that story out there. And so it's hard for, I think this is the failure of the press, right? Or why you got to find like reliable people to listen to on these things. But, it just makes like a fucking shitstorm. And it's why, frankly, it's why I don't really know what's going on with it a whole lot, because I don't care a whole lot. To the extent that, quote, the swamp is maybe still like, I don't know if this is good or bad for the swamp. If it's bad, then I'm happy. If somehow it's good for it, then I definitely don't like the Podestas. And if he's pissed off, then I guess that's good. I don't know.
The way I see this whole thing playing out, and I was thinking about this today, this morning. I don't know why. I was listening to something about it, I guess. The way I see it playing out, though, is you have the liberals are like hardcore, like they know this is he's colluding with Russia, right?
We knew it.
They knew it. So no matter what the fuck comes out, number one, it's not going to be enough to like really do anything I don't think like impeach him or anything like that. I don't think it's going to be enough. But the liberals are going to feel vindicated because there's going to be some little kernel of something that maybe alludes to some possibility that he had some connection with somebody in Russia, whatever. So they're going to keep beating that same drum, and they're going to feel vindicated in it. And then the Trumpkins are going to feel the other way. Like I don't think there's going to be any real resolution, because I don't think there's going to be like a smoking gun. Like, oh yeah, like Trump invited fucking Putin to his hotel on Fifth Avenue last year.
Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, exactly.
Melania gave him a back rub while they discussed how he was going to fix the election, right?
Exactly.
I'm not gonna lie, it is more interesting than when Obama was in, because I don't care about like any particular issue all that much, and I don't have any hope for like a politician at that level accomplishing a whole lot. I mean, he can like step out of the Paris Accord. He could do something crazy at any moment, but it's like every day there is some wild scandal that people are like losing their minds over, or non-scandal that people are losing their minds over. And I don't know. This gets back to what we were talking about before, like trying to understand the impact on culture as it's happening. Like the way that Hollywood has like factored into this stuff and now what's going on with them, which is like on a separate track, but it's not, like totally
not
separate.
unrelated.
It's hard
No,
for
not at
them
all.
to sort of like moralize and preach while all this is going on there. Every day things are coming out. And then you have like Jimmy Kimmel, someone who I used to like a lot and was funny. And a lot of these guys, they become much less funny once they become political because for various reasons, but where he's fucking full of shit. And I don't know, it'll be curious to see like on what comes out of this. If there's actually like a realignment that is some way healthier. I mean, that's probably a pipe dream. But
to step back from like any details, like I always think about I really do feel that we're in like a fucking really transformative time, right? But then again, it's like, well, maybe we're really not, because maybe our parents thought that, and
is that
maybe
how it
their
always
parents
feels?
thought. I think it always feels that way, because like, I mean, our parents, they went through the 70s and 80s, they went through the end of the Cold War, and then
this is the
their
most important
parents went
election
through
in
World
history.
War II, World War I before that, then Spanish-American War, then the Civil War before that. Like, there's always been crazy shit happening over the past, reasonable, century or two that you could think of. It's been pretty damn crazy, tumultuous.
Every presidential election, and the next one will certainly be no different, gets portrayed as the biggest election in our lifetimes.
Well,
yeah,
I will say this.
Every single one of them.
Let me say this. I think all of those instances in history that you just mentioned, including right now, I think those are, up to that point, the most important point or a turning point in history. I think what people don't realize, and myself included, is, civilization and peace and us not blowing up ourselves, especially with nuclear weapons now, is a very, very fine line. This is not, society and humanity and the continued existence and somewhat peaceful existence of humanity on this planet is a very, it's like standing an egg on its edge. It's very, I mean, if you poke it one direction or the other, it only takes something small to continue to go down that path to really push you out of equilibrium. So I think all these things, the Vietnam War, World War I, World War II, the Cold War, all this kind of stuff, we look at it in hindsight because everything's fine now. But had it gone a little, just nudged in the opposite direction, we might not be here, talking about it. So
Cuban Missile Crisis.
Or had it gone a little bit in a different direction, we could be living in a much better place right now.
Right, exactly. So I think all these things are actually, pivotal points in history, including right now, because, and like I said, it's easy to look back through 200, 300 years of history in the United States and say, oh, everything was pretty good for the most part and stuff like that. And maybe it was and maybe it wasn't, but it doesn't take much to really push a society over the edge to a really bad situation.
Like if somehow we avoided World War I from happening, imagine how different the world would be.
Yeah. Well, we've mentioned this before, and it really is a crazy thought experiment to think about like all that human capital that was just lost. And especially these are like young men in their prime, and like people in their mid 20s to the age of 30, like that's their most productive time period as far as like their intellectual capacity, their capacity to be inventive, their capacity to do what they got to do in their life, right? That's the spot. And it's like all the guys are out there just dying in the trenches.
The most
from
technologically
advanced
like generation in human history, right in their prime, got killed off in just absolutely massive numbers. Never mind like the political ramifications, just the loss of that, like I said, the political capital. And then you have to, we're including, because the three of us, I think, agree on this, World War II as part of getting involved in World War I, which a lot of historians, I think, make a good argument that it was like a lot of weird circumstances about how that went down, and it definitely didn't need to happen. And then what happened after World War I into World War II, you could argue, is almost like a continuation of the same thing. And so you can sort of view it as one long, horrific war. And then the wars themselves could have gone in any sort of direction, of course. But we won those wars, I guess, but the amount of like devastation to physical infrastructure and then human capital. I mean, this isn't quite the right way of looking at it, but we could have had iPhones in like, the 60s and 70s instead of, or we could have had self-driving cars by now. And but seriously, like all the technological advances, just like the advancement of humanity in general. So yeah, unfortunately you don't get to run this experiment a bunch of times and say like, oh, that time we had 5 world wars and this one we had none. Right. And then look at the, the consequences of each. And, fair point. So anyway, just one other quick comment on that, about being sort of on at any given point, sort of teetering on going one direction or the other. And then, especially when I think about this a lot with, like regards to new technology. So like when nukes became a reality, there was this period where, we're going to blow the fucking world up and like kill off all the humans, right? Like, not that that's not a concern right now, but we seem to have found like an equilibrium, came damn close to fucking ourselves up. Yeah. But North Korea notwithstanding, I mean, that might change things. And at any given moment, you don't know what's going to happen with like terrorists and everything else. Yeah. But I think generally, as far as nuclear goes, there's not that like, you're not living with that fear in the way that they did, like, kids like being taught in school to go underneath their desks and then talking about as adults about how that really messed with them psychologically. But then you think of other technologies like, and how we're probably going to have similar moments. It's going to be like, well, we're going to have to hope that like we sort of went out in a new normal. So like, as AI advances or as we have self-driving cars and we have, how is that sort of integrated with our society? And do we come to this new understanding of what is acceptable and what's not? Because this gets to culture and morality and all these things that took a really long time for our, let's say, Western civilization to figure out and be on the same page. Oh yeah, this is really wrong. This is correct. Here's the areas we're still debating. That's going to have to be fought out in these new realms. In like, this is what Black Mirror gets into, I think, but like in a very short time frame with a like immense amount of power potentially in any one person's hand or a group of people's hand to be able to do like a lot of damage. So I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, surely scientific advancement and technology we are quantum leaps ahead of where we were just 100 years ago. And not just where we were 100 years ago, but the rate at which technology is advancing is insane. So fast that even people within the own industry can't keep up with the specifics of it. So the idea that we would be able to understand all the possible implications of a new and revolutionary technology, whatever it is, whether it be a weapon, whether it be medicine, whether it be communication or self-driving cars or whatever it is, it's definitely a huge danger. I mean, look at cell phones and stuff like that.
You just see with hacking, all the hacking things that come out, you like, how were you so vulnerable? And it's this gap between...
Well, the scary part about that is we had at my former employer, we had our IT guy come in and talk about, well, our our infrastructure is only as secure as the people who adhere to the security rules. And then he said, even at that, we're still completely vulnerable. Like, I'm going to tell you right now, your bank, I don't care whose bank it is, if a hacker wants to hack into your bank, they're going to do it. There's nothing they can do to stop them. That hacking is far and above past. A really, really good hacker can hack through any sort of system given enough time.
Even with all the hacking events that's occurred in the past couple of years, I think it's like it's been a shock to a lot of people, but it still seems like most people don't really grasp how vulnerable.
I mean, when I put anything on the internet or I do I just assume that somebody's going to hack it or somebody's.
But it's not even that.
It's not secure. Nothing is
the infrastructure,
secure.
The systems, and
the only thing that to me, I operate the only thing that is secure is what's literally in my home. If it's in a bank, if it's on the internet, it's not secure. It's not. Period.
Well, what about like infrastructure things, like the power grid, for example? Not. And what do you do if that were to be taken down? I mean,
well, the fortunate thing about that is a lot of communities and stuff like that are going to microgrids, and they're going to
That's actually happening?
Yeah, it's going. Distributed generation is like the next wave.
For this reason?
Part of it for power production in the United States, it's already very big. In Europe, distributed generation is where local cities or local communities, mostly right now you're seeing it in hospitals, universities, they generate their own power. It's cheaper, it's more economical, and it's more
cheaper?
It's way cheaper.
It's less to scale, right?
It's a smaller facility. Okay, so you don't have an 800 megawatt power plant feeding the entire town. You just make a 500 kilowatt unit that you need to power the hospital. So now you have continuous power all the time with redundancy, with backup.
So
it's cheaper and it's more reliable.
The redundancy, I would imagine, is a big
absolutely.
deal, though, because they still have access to the larger grid.
They could if they wanted to, yeah. But even in their own systems, they build in redundancy. So they do it for grid stability. They don't have to rely on the grid. They have their own backup power, and they can do it for cheaper. They can. The technology is now that these things have gotten so small and so efficient and so cheap that now almost every hospital, university, elder care facility, condominium complex are all putting in their own systems. And probably the biggest thing that's driving this is internet servers. Internet servers consume so much electricity for cooling capacity. It is mind-boggling that they literally, they want to dump this. They want to dump these facilities in Brooklyn. There's no infrastructure and there's no power generation for them.
They're all in the West.
Google is putting these things right on the roofs to generate their own electricity and do their own heating and cooling for the facility because they literally can't get the power.
That's why all these facilities are out. And like I know up in Nova Scotia, they have a lot of them because they have this. They had this big infrastructure effort to put in like crazy fiber optic cables, like running up there, and then just like the combination of the colleges that are up there, and it's almost like a snowball effect where like some of the facilities start going in, and the infrastructure shows that they get the rates down and everything else. There's a ton of them in Utah and out west, because I think that's where a lot of the like NSA ones are, but also like EMC and a lot of those companies and Google and Amazon, they have a lot of them out there, and I'm assuming because like they don't need to be in the middle of a city. Why would you use a real like city real estate for something like that?
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true, and it makes it less risky that somebody's going to come in and burn the building down, right? If you're in the middle of nowhere. Realistically, when you look at power generation and distribution, look at the miles and miles and miles of wires that are run out into rural America or between major cities and stuff like that. Why on God's green earth would you do that if you could produce the power right there? They only did it back in the day because the technology was that, hey, we have to spend $1 billion to put in a massive nuclear plant to then, feed half of the state with electricity. The only way to do it was that way. Now everything is so much cheaper, so much more reliable, completely automated now. Again, most of those systems were mechanically operated systems. Now they're all electronically controlled. They can be remotely controlled. They can give you information as to when the facilities need to be, when they need to be brought down, when they need to have maintenance. They have scheduled maintenance contracts. So all this kind of stuff is, it's all been micro-sized. It's all cheap. It's all reliable.
So it sounds like you're confident that the capability is there right now, and at the cost, it's cost effective.
It's there. Yeah.
How far along, though, would you say like a substantial amount of these types of facilities are and actually implementing
in densely populated areas like New York, New Jersey, parts of Pennsylvania, Boston, the Northeast? It's huge. It's everywhere.
Really? Is this not
hundreds of millions of dollars a year going into this? I literally put together a 10-year business plan for my former employer on this and told them we need to go into this because this is a humongous market. And they were like, yes, you're right. It's a massive market.
But this is like a comforting story you're telling. So, and this is all this money being spent on preventative measures, or is there like a more immediate purpose for you? Said that the costs, like they would actually like receive a benefit like short term in terms of lower utility costs, or really it's just for the redundancy and like the security of not relying on a larger grid and being less vulnerable to attacks.
No, it's cheaper. It's cheaper.
And it's got to be safer. Assuming we did this over the long term and like kind of the power got decentralized in this way, it would be a lot safer, right? A lot less vulnerable to like massive attacks.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
The cheaper is what seems strange to me because again, it's less.
Well, okay, so here's where part of it comes in, especially when it comes to universities, hospitals, condominium complexes, apartment complexes. they usually have cogeneration facilities, which means they'll burn natural gas or whatever the heck it is, and they'll pair it with photovoltaic cells and a gas turbine or whatever else. And then they'll take the waste heat from that after they produce electricity and they'll make steam with it. And then they'll run the steam through the facility to heat the facility. Or they'll put absorption chillers on the system, run the steam into the absorption chiller and air condition the whole unit. So they can use the waste heat from it to then produce heat or air conditioning in addition to the electricity that they produce. There are tons of cogeneration facilities, but they're usually buddied up next to a process plant, a chemical plant that needs the heat or the steam to do that. Now that they've microsized these things or made them significantly smaller, you could just have a condominium house complex or a small hospital or even a small business that can do this to heat their facility, air condition their facility, and produce their own electricity. And it's all cheaper.
How small are we talking for, like, say, a condominium complex for it to be worth it? And like what's the size of this thing?
They come from a couple hundred kilowatts to 10 to 50 megawatts. So you don't know what that means. Okay.
No, I meant physically how large
maybe
is it?
To service, 40 apartment buildings to 4,000 apartment buildings.
No, but how much space does it take up? What is this thing? What does it look like?
You could have a unit the size of this room.
Okay, well, people listening aren't in this room.
Okay,
so.
it could be
15 by 15.
Yeah, it could be that big. It could be smaller.
A little smaller.
Yeah,
carefully. I don't want to give away
there
identifying information.
There are tons of these things all over the place.
NSA knows, man. They're listening in
only,
Utah right now.
Slightly,
what up, NSA?
The only slightly limiting issue to this technology is that most of it is driven by.
They're listening live though.
Burning fossil fuels, and obviously there is pollution restraints on these sorts of things. So right now with centralized power generation, you have the EPA and your local New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and so on and so forth that tests the emissions from these places to make sure they're being compliant. If you have these things distributed all over the place, then it's a lot more chance. It's like people's cars then. People's cars have to meet a certain sort of emission requirement. You kind of have to have the same sort of thing in place, which I guess kind of works for cars. So I guess it's not really that.
So I know a lot of the power generation in this country, or at least for the traditional, not what you're talking about, or that's what I'm going to ask. It's like a lot of these like quasi public-private, like co-op type entities. So what you're talking about though is purely private, right?
Purely private, yeah. I mean, they don't. So private in the sense that they're producing power for themselves. It might be a public university.
Sure.
It might be a library. It might be a town hall. It might be.
But this isn't like an explicit, like straight line government.
No.
Okay. So then my next question is, because of how intertwined the government is with these things and also all the rent seeking. So my question is, this would seem like potentially, if it's as viable and makes as much sense as you say, it seems to me like there would just be some parties that would be threatened by it. And they're already, I would assume, so intertwined with some pretty powerful government agencies. And it's easy, like you see this with, like, say, the FDA, where it's not difficult for, it's a little conspiratorial, but I think it's pretty much like openly known. Like a pharmaceutical company could make a case explicitly or behind the scenes that a particular thing that is undermining like a big revenue opportunity for them, that thing is like not in the public's like interest safety wise, and that you should like limit or ban its use until they come up with the solution. And I could imagine something similar occurring in
so right now that's not quite what's happening, especially in the densely populated areas. So as the population continues to grow, you can't really jam any more infrastructure into Brooklyn, for example, but somehow they're jamming more people into there, so you need more power. So actually what these facilities are doing is they're actually partnering, or they're selling their excess power back to the local utility, and then the local utility will distribute that excess power to the new users. So the local utility actually kind of likes it because they don't have to have any capital investment. You're producing excess electricity for them that they need anyway to distribute within their grid in the first place. So the people who produce the power get paid by the utility, and then the utility reset. So
these are the smaller guys making extra power that the big ones are buying?
That's right.
Don't they find that destabilizing to the grid though?
No, because it's excess power.
I know, but excess power that comes through like with some, like I know that's the issue with the like solar and wind or the intermittence. If that's a word. It's something they don't like. It's actually destabilizing.
Yes,
all
all these facilities coordinate with the utility and say, "We'll give you 500 kilowatts of excess power for this long." And
also, of course, if it's natural gas, they know when they're turning it on. It's not random.
Yes. And realistically, I don't think the utilities are this far along in automating everything, but realistically, there's no reason why all these systems couldn't possibly be completely interconnected and all this information be shared in real time and just run or interpreted through a master network and all that kind of stuff.
So have you read about, because I know there's a couple books about it, and it's been brought up to me by a few people that I normally don't have these conversations with, so I feel like it's becoming more of like a common conversation about the vulnerability of the power grid in the U.S. to something like, whether it be an EMT, whether it be like something from space,
Solar
like coming in a solar flare, or a terrorist attack, where there are certain, I'm sure you could speak to it, but certain pieces of equipment that are like take a really long time to make and are really custom into transformers or the transformers themselves, where like it seems like there's a vulnerability where a bunch of them could be taken out, and it could take literally this is what they claim 10 years to replace them.
Yeah, maybe to replace the full scale of them, depending on how big that is. Yeah, I mean, I this would be a hedge against that, I suppose. At least for most users. I mean, the reality is every house going to have one of these? Probably not. Not for a very long time if they do.
No, but could neighborhoods like
yes,
band together and say like, hey, do you want to go in on this with us? And
yeah, that would make perfect sense. They would. Yeah.
Would they be able to use the existing, like, say, power lines and infrastructure, or would they have to have like a secondary?
Well, I assume that's owned by the utility. So unless they came up with an agreement with the utility to sell back power to them or to lease the lines, I'm sure the utility would lease the lines to distribute the power amongst the homes. There could be. I mean, there's a million different agreements. Well, it's the quasi free market.
Well,
man. There could be 1,000 different.
Well, this is where I'm suspicious. This is where it sounds
cat.
like an amazing idea that the government would stop from happening for various reasons. So I could see them coming in and being like, in such and such town and these towns, like, look at these examples where like they like cut deals, like where they share infrastructure. And so, cause you have the, like I said, you have the supplier and you have the transmission.
I think the biggest obstacle or the biggest excuse that they would make for this would be emissions. Would be, well, how do we regulate your emissions? You know, we used to have 40,000 power plants that we could regulate emissions on. Now we're going to have 4 million of these things. We can't, all this kind of stuff. But to me, it's the same thing with like cars. It's like, well, they regulate emissions on cars, right? They could do the same thing with the package out of the factory,
Quick anecdote on the cars, and then maybe we go on to another topic, or
please.
Didn't mean to cut you out, but so I found this when researching. I'm trying to remember, but I was researching something on Tesla, and I came across. I think it was from late last year, actually, so it's not even that recent. But it was like the head technology guy or engineer or whatever from this automotive exhaust provider for like would you call it OEM?
Yeah.
Right. So they provide like OEM like exhaust for like whoever hires them. They get these contracts, and so this guy's like an expert on these exhaust systems, and he was talking about like how far they've come, and it's one of these stories. Like you look at the advancement of exhaust systems on American cars, and it's mind blowing. The first time I heard like the stats, I didn't believe them. Like something like 97% like more efficient than they were even like 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Like really radical, massive improvements in these sorts of things. But they were talking about like the viability of like electric cars, for example. And it was funny because it was on like CNBC or something where they were trying to like somehow do like it was Trump related somehow, right? And they were taking a Trump angle on this. And so the question was sort of posed to him, like, how could Trump stop Tesla from moving forward? And this guy gave an answer they weren't expecting, which is a really fascinating thought, which is they think they're starting to approach a point where the exhaust filtration systems are so efficient that the output will be cleaner than the air actually going into the system. And so that you would actually be making theoretically the environment cleaner. It would be pulling it like the air you're breathing would have more pollutants in it than what the system would spit out on the back end. And so you can make an argument that driving your car is actually better for the environment and cleaner than driving an electric car, even if you don't account for all the environmental issues that never get talked about with the batteries and everything else with that technology.
I can tell you that my previous employer, we had a job in just outside of LA County. And it was a huge groundbreaking thing for politicians there and all this kind of stuff. And they were going to post the emissions of the unit to show everybody, look at how green, look at how clean this unit is, and that sort of stuff. Well, after they did the performance testing and the emissions testing, they couldn't post the results because the air that was going into the unit was significantly more contaminated and dirty and bad for people. Now, again, this is LA, so, take it with a grain of salt. But the stuff coming out of the back was way cleaner than the stuff that was coming in the first place. So
still, people aren't dropping dead in LA from pollution.
Aside from cleaning up the crap that the plant actually produced itself, it was a filtration facility for the crap that resides in the LA area. So yeah, I mean the technology exists there. I don't know how cheap it would be. I don't know how realistic.
Can you imagine a day when building a power plant in an area like LA or like on the the Raritan River? What's the one that the Driscoll goes over?
Raritan, yeah.
Where like it's just you see the plants and it's disgusting and it stinks and I assume it's disgusting. It might be steam for, but we're putting that plant like, oh man, we gotta clean up the smog problem. Like, and we'll put a power plant right on the water there, and we'll clean up the rivers and the air because of this amazing filtration, and they can use the waste product that they capture for like some other use for power or whatever.
Yeah, at this point right now, it's very, very cost intensive to capture particular pollutants, depending on what it is. This is what I do for a living. This is the only reason why I know that. I didn't actually research a lot of this. But like cleaning up NOx is pretty simple. You put a catalyst and spray some ammonia in there. Destroying CO, which is a ridiculous greenhouse gas and bad for the ozone, is just a platinum catalyst. You don't need to spray anything in there. So those two things are really easy to clean up. Mercury is not an easy thing to clean up, but there's really not that much mercury floating around unless you're burning coal. Sulfur is pretty difficult to clean up. Usually use some sort of lime injection system, but
is that super damaging?
Sulfur is acid rain.
Okay.
It's very damaging. I mean, there's technology. That's part of the reason why there hasn't been a coal-fired power plant built in the United States in the past like 6 or 7 years. Is not just because of regulation, but to clean up the crap that comes out of the back of a coal-fired power plant to make it not terrible is like $1 billion worth of equipment. It's very, very expensive to do that sort of thing. And because natural gas prices are so low, natural gas has essentially trace amounts of sulfur. So the hundreds of millions of dollars you would spend on a back-end system to remove the sulfur from a coal-fired power plant, you don't have with a gas turbine.
So do you actually think that coal is not like as viable as because
the price is so low of natural gas, it doesn't make any sense to burn coal. Maybe my feeling is within 10 years, we're going to have a lot of, because there's a lot of places in the world.
Because in India and China, like on a global scale, coal is leading right now as far as new plants. And even in places like Germany and France, right?
Right. So we're very lucky in the United States. We've got a ton of natural gas here. Okay. I believe Russia has a lot of natural gas, but India, China, even Europe doesn't have any natural gas.
Us in Russia, eh?
Almost all the natural gas that they get is in liquefied form. There's almost no liquefying plants in the United States. There's very few. And we have tons and tons and tons of natural gas right now. Within the next 10 years, there's going to be tons and tons of liquefied natural gas terminals at all the ports in the United States, in which case we're going to become a mass exporter of natural gas, going to be sent to all these other countries, which is then going to drive the price of natural gas in the United States back up, which will then make coal viable once again as a main source of power generation. At that point, we may have advanced to use other technologies and other things, but realistically, the reason why India and China are using coal is because they don't have natural gas. Because natural gas, to make 100 megawatts of electricity, you throw a gas turbine in for a couple $1,000,000, and within 6 months you can be up and running. To build a coal-fired power plant takes you much longer than that. It's way more expensive. But they have coal sitting there in their backyard. They mine it, they dig it up,
and also they're less concerned about pollution. And I think, I think legitimately so, because like for us to put in a coal plant and to like deal with a certain amount of pollution that comes from that relative to what our options and our standard of living right now, it might not be like worth it or whatever. But if you're talking about like rural China, the benefits of that little bit of pollution,
they'll deal with a little smog to have the lights turn on and not freeze in the winter.
Exactly.
I hear you.
Right. I mean, it'll be a huge net gain for them, and then they can work on cleaning it up and better technologies from that point.
Yeah.
Is it really difficult to get the natural gas over there right now? Because those, I mean, obviously they have huge populations. They need to. Yeah,
the issue is the transporting. It's natural gas, so it's in a gaseous form, and
big heavy tanks, right? And
big heavy tanks, and then it's mostly empty space. There's not that much to it. I mean, if you've ever seen like there's some buses that run on natural gas. I mean, their natural gas tank is humongous, and it doesn't go that far. The idea is you liquefy it, you pressurize it to such a high pressure and low temperature that you make it liquid. So now the density of what you're shipping is like 100 times or 1,000 times more dense than if it was gas. So if you send a barge over with liquefied natural gas, you could literally send 100 or 1,000 times more natural gas than you could if it was in gaseous form.
Oh my God, how explosive is that barge?
Oh yeah, that's also, well, because actually, realistically, if you look at like automobiles running on compressed natural gas, I think are actually way more efficient than running
But
like
that's a
gasoline
concern.
engines. But yeah, it's kind of a concern. And like I said, you have a giant. You have a giant pressure vessel. It's a giant bomb sitting in the back
We
of
have
your
this
car.
new propane car.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's would you take a propane tank and strap it to the back of your car? What if you get in an accident and that sort of thing? So, it's definitely a safety concern.
That's actually relevant around here. We had did you see the big fire around the corner
I did,
in Garwood
yes.
last week?
Yeah.
Did you hear why that started?
No.
So that was a one of those standard 33-pound propane cylinders that go in the back of a forklift.
Yeah.
There was a fire that broke out, and then I guess they didn't have like because even though a fire breaks out around a propane tank, like they don't just go up.
Of course.
There's all these.
Yeah.
So, but I guess there was like some issue with it, or they weren't like up to code or whatever, and one of those tanks blew up.
Oh, jeez. Okay, I was wondering why there were so many fire trucks around here.
So I got to physical therapy, and it was on the news, and I'm like looking at my house. I'm like, what the? It was just Channel 7 News. I'm like, what the hell happened?
That's funny.
Yeah. So interesting.
How crazy would it be for a propane tank to explode? Like one for your.
I don't know. I'm sure
grill.
you could YouTube it.
I'm sure you could.
So the reason I know
we'll do that for you guys.
So the reason I know what happened there is because my girlfriend's brother is a firefighter in the area, and he was actually like one of the first ones there. And I asked him that question, and he said that propane, the little factoid he had for me was that propane expands upon explosion by a factor of 25. So I don't know how that matches up like with all the other things, but you could just imagine something expanding immediately by 25 times. I mean, it seems pretty bad. So
yeah.
And then everything else that it throws when it does that. And
explosions are bad in general. You don't want to blow things up. Well, unless you want to blow something up.